Coming to you from North Atlanta Studios and brought to you by Mesmerize Media. It's the Advantage of Adversity podcast. And now, here's your host, Glenn Carver.
Hello, everyone. It's Glenn Carver, and I am your host for the Advantage of Adversity podcast. The mission of this podcast is to highlight stories of amazing people who have been through significant adversity, either in their professional or maybe their professional and personal lives. And in spite of that adversity, they have made the decision, they have made the choice to find the opportunity and maybe even the advantage in the adversity. And today on the show, I've got a true American hero, retired United States Air Force Colonel Lee Ellis. He is a nationally recognized leadership coach. He's an award-winning author of multiple books that I'll tell you about in a moment. And he's a certified speaking professional, which is a large designation in the world of public speaking that I massively admire. He is the president of Leading with Honor, Freedom Star Media, and Leadership Freedom. Some of the books he's written are Engage with Honor, Tap Code, which I can't wait to learn more about, Leadership DNA, this brand new book that he just gifted to me called Captured by Love, Inspiring True Stories, Romance Stories from Vietnam POWs. This is kind of his chicken soup for the soul, if you will. I really can't wait to dig into that. And I think his landmark book that I read in April of 2013, Leading with Honor, Leadership Lessons from the Hanoi Hilton. This is an epic book that you should, if you love anything about leadership, read it, have your organization read it immediately. Colonel Ellis has been seen on all the major media outlets, including Fox, CNN, C-SPAN, CBS, World News Tonight. But more importantly than that, in my opinion, he's a Georgia Bulldog. Go
Amen.
Dogs.
Amen.
Colonel Ellis, welcome to the Advantage of Adversity.
Well, thank you, Glenn.
Welcome.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, it's going
Good
great
to see you again.
You too. So what we're going to talk about today and do the deep dive on is the fact that, and this is unthinkable to me in the world of adversity, but on November 7th, 1967, I was in diapers. Your F-4 Phantom was shot down. You're on your 53rd bombing mission over North Vietnam. You were shot down. You were quickly captured by the Viet Cong, and that's when the party started. You were taken to the famous Hanoi Hilton, where you were a prisoner of war for 5 years, 4 months, and 2 weeks, a total of 1,955 days.
Your memory's good.
Woo!
That's exactly right.
Wow.
Yes.
That's incredible. That's incredible. But before we dive into that, just tell everybody about where you're from, where did you grow up, when did you decide to get into the Air Force? Give us some background on Colonel Ellis.
Well, I grew up on a farm in North Georgia. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, my parents took me down to the Veterans Memorial Park in Athens, and there was a World War II fighter plane there on a pedestal. My dad picked me up and sat me on the wing, and I went over and looked in the cockpit, and I just this is me. This is where I belong.
Wow.
And so on that farm, I grew up about 10 miles north of Athens, between Athens and Commerce. I plowed mules. But when I'd be plowing those mules, this is like 12, 13 years of age, I'd look up in the sky, and I'd see this during the Korean War, those airplanes going over in big formations.
Sure.
And I thought, that's going to be me. I'm not going to be plowing a mule forever.
Wow.
And I went from plowing mules to flying supersonic jets. Right after I graduated from college, I went to flight school, graduated in 1966, got my wings, and an assignment that said F-4 Phantom Pipeline Southeast Asia. So I went from plowing mules to flying supersonic jets in 6 years.
And that's what's I call a vertical aggressive move.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Well, it's a unique era, that people have been plowing mules and oxen for thousands of years.
Yes.
But we didn't have supersonic jets in just 20 or 30 years. So anyway, it was very special, and it fit me well, personality-wise. I'd always been an adventurous person. I'm a good risk taker. I know
You have
where
to be.
I know where the line is, and don't go over that line, but you get very close to it. I was an athlete in sports. I lettered in 4 sports at Commerce High School:
Wow. What sports?
football, baseball, basketball, and track.
I knew track was going to be in there.
It was a little school, though,
Okay.
man. It was a little.
But with your
small
build,
school.
I bet you were very fast.
I wasn't fast enough. I wanted to play quarterback at the University of Georgia because my uncle, my mother's brother, had played there in 28 to 30. His 2 sons had played there in the early 50s under Wally Butts, and I used to go watch them practice. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be the quarterback at Georgia because I was a quarterback in high school.
Okay.
But I only weighed 155 pounds, and I wasn't the fastest guy on the team.
Okay.
And so I went to Georgia, and I said, okay, ROTC, here I come. And I got in ROTC, and I was probably the worst student who ever graduated in 4 years, but I was a distinguished graduate in Air Force ROTC.
Wow.
And I got to go into the first class with the Academy guys in 1965. 3 days after I finished my last class, I got commissioned and went to Valdosta, Georgia, to flight school, and I was where I wanted to be.
Unbelievable. You did not waste any time.
No, sir.
2 things are resonating with me. You had the vision to be the quarterback at UGA and a fighter pilot. God love you on both accounts. And you really, I think you were blessed in knowing what you wanted to do at such an early age.
I was. I really was. In the 8th grade, in my homeroom, we didn't have classes in it, but you went there to homeroom to sign in the morning, was in the library. And I sat next to the A's. So I'd pull out, you had to be in there for about 10 minutes. I'd pull out aircraft, famous aircraft,
right.
Aerodynamics. And I would read, in the 8th grade, I would read those books for 10 or 15 minutes. So when I took the tests in college as a sophomore I went through with flying colors on all the tests and the physical. I passed that to be a pilot. So it just it's just where I was supposed to be.
Incredible. Well, you passed the right tests.
Yes, I did.
For sure. And you and your wife, Mary, have been married almost 49 years.
Yes. I dated a lot of girls in Valdosta, at Valdosta State College back then.
Sure.
And but I didn't meet the one.
Sure.
And so I went off to Southern California to fly to get combat training. My assignment, graduating when I got my wings in August 1966, it said F-4 Phantom Pipeline Southeast Asia, and over half my class got that assignment.
Okay.
So I was assigned to, there were several bases that were doing the Combat Replacement Training Unit, the RTU, where we would get combat qualified in the F-4, but one of them was in Southern California, in the high desert of Southern California, right between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, about a third of the way from there, from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And so it was just a great place to fly. In the high desert out there, we'd fly
Sounds
across
beautiful.
Death Valley, and we'd fly up over the mountains, and occasionally we'd fly over the coast and get in a dogfight with the Navy guys.
Nice.
And we were only about 120 miles south of China Lake, where they were anchored for the Top Gun folks, and that's where those movies were filmed. So when I watch those movies, I tell my kids and grandkids, that's where I was flying.
Nice.
And occasionally, one time we got in such a dogfight up there practicing, and you crack that afterburner in the F-4, and it uses a lot of fuel. And I cracked the afterburner and got low on fuel. So I landed at China Lake and got more fuel to go back home with.
Yeah, I would imagine an F-4 Phantom doesn't have a significant glide ratio.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It runs on pure power.
Yeah.
It's got 2 big J79 engines, and when we got in a dogfight, we didn't go try to outturn anybody. We would go vertical. Okay. Because we had the power to go vertical, and you will all turn this way and come back down on you.
Wow. Wow. Well, I've had the pleasure of soloing in a Cessna.
Oh, wonderful.
And I've jumped out of a couple planes, but flying a fighter jet, that's just got to be the rush of rushes to me. It's got to be the ultimate adrenaline rush.
Yeah, it's exciting, but we were very well trained.
Sure.
Okay, very well trained, and also very well trained on how to eject.
Yes.
And fortunately, the guys that packed those parachutes did a really good job.
Thank God for them, or we wouldn't be having this conversation.
That's right.
So let's fast forward to that fateful day that changed your life forever, November 7th, 1967. You're on your 53rd bombing mission with Captain Ken Fisher, correct?
Right.
He was in the front seat. You were in the rear seat. You took on enemy fire. Your plane got blown up into several pieces.
Right.
You're going down.
Right.
And I believe you said in a video that I watched, you had about 4 seconds before death. So you ejected, and that's a phenomenon right there. You eject, and you're dealing with 18 Gs.
Yep.
So let's talk about the adversity that you felt emotionally in that moment. The moment that you know you were hit and the plane was not going to fly, what emotions did you feel?
I didn't have any emotions. I was well trained, and as a fighter pilot, you got to do what you got to do.
Yes.
And we were trained that once that airplane is not flying, it's going to hit the ground very quickly.
Yes.
We were going close to 500 miles an hour, over 500 miles an hour.
Yes.
So now once it blew up, it wasn't going that fast, but it's still going very fast, and it's going to hit the ground very quickly. So you have to get out. And so that decision was quick, and now I'm in my parachute coming down, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got to evade capture. How can I evade capture? I tried to slip my parachute. There was a river about 200 meters south, and if I can get to that river, it's only a mile to the Gulf of Tonkin, and I can get the Navy to pick me up. So I'm thinking positive.
Sure, of course. Of course.
Those old parachutes didn't slip much. But
Thinking positive.
Yeah. You got to think positive. And so I did my parachute landing fall, pulled out my emergency radio, battery powered, and called the wingman and said, hey, I'm on the ground 200 meters north of the river. I'm headed south. Start strafing them. They're start strafing them.
Okay, what's that word you're saying?
Strafing.
Strafing them.
That means shooting guns at the enemy. Okay,
got it.
And so a couple of years, they didn't. And that was good because they surrounded me immediately and captured me. The militia did. And a couple of years after I came home, 5.5 years later, I came home. But a couple of years later, I was at a fighter pilot reunion out in San Antonio, and my wingman came over and said, hey, I heard your call, but I couldn't shoot that good. I didn't want to hit you.
No.
And I said, you're very wise, because they surrounded me immediately and captured me.
Who was your wingman?
John Sloan. Actually, he was the flight lead, but because of their angle that we were working with a Mystifac Forward Air Controller, and he told us where to bomb. He had highlighted where to bomb, and we were closer to being able to rotate in on it than our flight lead was. So he said, you go ahead. So we rolled in and came at it. So he kind of was like the wingman, but he was actually the flight lead. But John is about 84, 85. I talked to him this week.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I just love that camaraderie.
Yeah, it's very, very important to have camaraderie, and of course that was going to become very important in the POW camps.
Yes,
because we had to stay connected.
Yes,
you don't want to be alone fighting the enemy.
No.
Or whether you got disease or an illness or wounded, you don't want to be alone, because human nature is not a laptop,
right.
Not a phone. You have to be encouraged and to think positive. You have to have somebody around you that, they believe in you or they care about you. That adds a lot to your energy.
Yeah, amen. Mm-hmm. That speaks to the adversity and the hell of solitary confinement, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's amazing to me that your plane was blown into several pieces, but you and Captain Fisher lived.
It is amazing.
What are the odds of that? Both of you survived.
It blew into several pieces, but the cockpit stayed intact and it all worked. Wow. And this was unreal. Now, as it turned out, we found out several years later that we were probably the first to be blown out of the sky. We had a lot of people
Somebody's
on the
gotta be
ground
first.
shooting at us,
Yeah.
but we found out that we were probably the first ones who had this bad fuse, and it detonated the bombs 1.8 seconds after they came off the airplane. And it blew right up and blew because normally an airplane doesn't get blown up by anti-aircraft artillery, people on the ground shooting at you. It gets hit. It might blow a hole in the wing or blow a hole in the engine, but it doesn't blow up.
Okay.
And this airplane blew up. And we were the first of about 8 or 10 until they decided we are not going to use those fuses anymore. It was a new fuse with a timer on it, and it was some of them were bad. Bad timing cost me several years.
Yes.
But most of the people that were in those airplanes that got blown up did not make it. I had a roommate and another guy who had been my roommate, Lance Sidon, who's the Medal of Honor winner, only one from the Air Force Academy, a very courageous, wonderful guy. He got blown up, and he did eject, and he came down. It was in Laos, and he came down and hit one of these rock mountains. I've forgotten what we called them, but it was just rock, and he hit it very steep, and it broke his leg and his back, and he was on the ground for 46 days crawling till captured. But he died 6 weeks after he got to Hanoi. But I didn't know about all of this until several years later, when another guy who was blown up, and he was the last one, and he saw it and called on his radio, said my flight lead's airplane blew up, and we were flying in close formation, sky spot bombing, and I saw his blow up, and it blew ours up, and don't ever use those fuses again, and so they shut it down. But he got captured, and he was a POW for 5 years and 2 months.
Wow. Not as long as you. So you hit the ground, you get captured, you begin I believe a 2-week journey to the Hanoi Hilton. Why did it take 2 weeks? Did you walk? Did you walk the whole time?
No, it took about 3 or 4 days for them to start moving me north.
Okay.
Because there was a typhoon came in, and it rained so hard, and they didn't have paved roads.
Okay.
Because we had bombed them out a lot, and they just hadn't paved them. And so these dirt roads, it was the Ho Chi Minh Trail highway, main highway, A1A, highway A1A, going down by the coast.
Sure.
But it was just muddy and that sort of thing, so we held off for a couple of days. And that goes into another whole story. The militia guy that was in charge of taking me north protected me. He would not let the locals beat me up. Isn't that amazing?
Wonder why.
He was a good man.
Okay.
There was a little church down there, and I learned 2 years ago, some of these Misty Facts have been back, and they know people that lived there in the area where I was shot down, and several of them were shot down, and they met the woman. They asked me where they met a guy who was a tour guide there who was a Vietnamese, and he was about 4 years old when we were bombing there. And this tour guide likes Americans, has accepted them, and he went up. He said, "Where'd you get shot down?" He called me on Facebook Messenger.
Wow.
Okay, this Vietnamese guy speaks English.
Unbelievable.
He calls me and he said, "Now, where were you shot down?" And I told him, and he said, "Oh, there's 2 places." And I said, "No, it wasn't that one. It was this one." He went and found the wife of the militia guy who was in charge of taking me north, and talked to her about me, and they were living in an underground bunker, their family was, and she said, "Yes, I remember him. He had eyebrows that were all the way across."
That's funny.
And he smiled, and they had me in their house, in their cave for 2 days and 2 nights, and I slept between his father and his 2-year-old daughter.
Unbelievable. This guy's a
Isn't
saint.
this unreal?
Wow.
I'm sure they were Christians because they had a little church in this town. And he was a good man, and he was tough, very tough, but he was very honorable.
Wow.
And the Vietnamese guy that I was talking to said, yes, he had a reputation. He died in 2015 at age 82 or 3. He had a reputation for being a very honorable person.
Wow. That's phenomenal. That's
It is.
part
It's
of your story
unreal.
I did not know. Is
This,
that story in the book?
no.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
I'll write it down someday. But and that guy came to Atlanta. The guy I was talking to on my cell phone
Yes.
came to Atlanta. The domestic pilots paid for him and his wife to come to the U.S. to one of their reunions back in September, and he came to Atlanta here on September the 23rd and spent the night with a Misty pilot right here in Marietta, about a mile from here. And I went over and spent time with him and his wife and talked to them and he told me about how they moved out of the village there because of the bombing and lived in a camp themselves, you know.
Incredible.
But he likes Americans, and he enjoyed his tour here. And most Vietnamese really like Americans. Okay. And many of my POW friends have gone back and have a good relationship with their enemy, just like we did in World War II.
I was going to say the same thing.
Warriors admire warriors.
Yes, yes.
But not the communists, okay?
Right.
They don't like the communists either.
Right, right.
They're just in charge over there.
Well, that's heartwarming. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So you eventually reach the Hanoi Hilton.
Yeah.
18-foot walls. The top is a perimeter of broken wine bottles, so built into the concrete, so nobody's ever escaped. What was
that? Was a French prison built in the 1890s, a Bastille prison. The walls were 14, 18. They're very tall, and just like you described them, and 4 or 5 feet thick. Nobody ever escaped out of that prison. And so the cell I went into was 6.5 by 7 feet with 3 other guys. And so we were there the next 8 months in that cell. We called this Little Vegas because so many fighter pilots had been to Las Vegas. And I lived in the Thunderbird cell block. There was a Thunderbird, Riviera, those different names of from the old casinos in Las Vegas.
Wow. Well, being in a cell of that size with 3 other men, that's a whole new definition of intimacy.
Yes, it
is. I mean, you're on top of each other.
Well, we had it was our bedroom. We slept there on wooden boards fastened to the wall. It was our dining room. We ate 2 meals a day there, a bowl of pumpkin soup or cabbage soup or sewer green soup, we called them. They were chopped up lily pads, boiled, with a piece of pig fat in them.
Okay.
And
that's something I've never
twice
tried.
a day. So that was our dining room, bedroom, dining room, our living room. We sat around there all day if we weren't in interrogation or being tortured. And it was our bathroom. We had a 3-gallon bucket, and thank goodness it had a lid, and we got to empty it the first thing every morning. So, you might be eating your dinner, and here's this guy over here with diarrhea. And
my God.
You learn to adapt,
Oh, yes,
buddy.
you do. That's a level of adversity I hope I never experience.
It's about the size of a bathroom in a gas station.
Yeah.
6.5 by 7 feet. Most of them are bigger than that now.
Unbelievable.
So
shower? Did you? How often did you shower?
Well, we didn't have a shower. They had a tank of water out there with a bucket with a wooden handle in it built into it, and you could just grab a bucket full of water and pour it over your body out of the tank. And we would do that about 4 or 5 times a week.
Okay.
So that helped
soap?
a lot. And pardon?
No soap?
Yeah, we'd had a piece of kind of like lye soap.
Okay.
We had a small towel about this big, like a hand towel, a little small one about 20 inches long.
Okay.
And we had a toothbrush and some toothpaste.
Okay.
We had a tin cup and a small clay pitcher that would hold about 1 liter.
Wow.
That's like a little more than a quart, right?
Wow.
About 1 liter, yeah.
Wow. Just amazing. Well, we men get ripe after a while when we don't bathe, so I would imagine it could get odoriferous in confined quarters like that.
Oh, yeah. And sometimes we get in trouble, we wouldn't do what they wanted us to, and we'd in resisting, and we might not get to bathe for a couple of weeks in the summertime. And you get boils, it'd be 95, 100 degrees in those cells in the summertime. And you get boils and stink and all that.
Sure.
But it was just part of life.
Yeah. Our ability to adapt is the human spirit, and the ability to adapt is mind-boggling.
It was unreal how well we adapted. The body and the mind adapted so well. I mean, not much food, and sometimes the guys had to go months without bathing. I mean, I didn't bathe for the first 2 weeks I was captured.
Yeah. Sure.
I bathed the first night they got me there, first afternoon. It was starting to get a little cool, and I got there November the 22nd, and poured that cold water on my body and cleaned. And they gave me they took my flight suit. They took my boots away, so I've been going barefooted. They took my flight suit away and gave me some black pajamas to wear. T-shirt, short sleeve T-shirt, didn't have any buttons on it, and a pair of shorts that had string to tie them on, and then these black pajamas over that I wore, and took me into interrogation when it got about 7 o'clock that night with 3 other guys that had been in the truck riding up with me. We were tied up in the back of a truck, bouncing along on those rough roads.
Sure.
You're going 30 miles an hour in that truck, and you hit one of them big holes, and your body go up in the air and come back down and slam the.
Yeah.
It hurt.
No luxury in that experience. So how many, when you were there, how many POWs were at the Hanoi Hilton at the same time?
Okay, at the Hanoi Hilton, there were usually about 50 or 60. 40 to let's say 50 or 60. No, we were in solitude. We were in isolation. Our cell walls did not touch any other cell. It was built, the Thunderbird, most of that was a cell block I was in. Most of them were totally isolated, so you couldn't tap on the walls. Later we learned the tap code.
Sure.
But you couldn't tap on the walls because there was nobody. There was a space of about 2 or 3 feet, like a little hallway there, separating the next cell. So we couldn't do that, and we couldn't talk loud, and because the guards were always in the hall, and if they caught you talking loud, they would come in and take you out and beat you up or tie you in ropes and do the rope torture.
Oh, God.
They were always looking for excuses to torture you because they wanted to get information or to get you to make propaganda.
Okay.
The communists really rely on propaganda. And if they could force you to say the bombing is wrong, man, they would. That's what we got tortured for, is to try to say the U.S. policies are wrong and all that. So then they could put that on Hanoi Hannah, which is like Tokyo Rose, of World War II, and say, listen to what this Air Force fighter pilot says, and they would end that war, Hanoi Hannah would end her program every night. GIs, don't risk your lives for this. Turn against the, turn your rifle in and take your uniform off and be successful and something, something.
Sure. And of course that didn't happen. So let's talk about before we talk about your book, Tap Code, and your communication strategy.
Now, Tap Code is not mine. I wrote the foreword to it, but I didn't write it. Smitty Harris brought the Tap Code in.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. I wrote, but I promote that book a lot because it's a really good book about the POW. Now, Smitty was there. He was POW number 5.
Okay.
And he brought the Tap Code in with him because he stayed after class in survival school and said, how did those guys in World War II tap from one building to the other on those pipes? You can't tap the dot and a dash like the Morse code. And the instructor said, oh, I should have told you. It was a Tap Code. It wasn't the Morse code. So that's Smitty brought that in.
So let's define the Tap Code and show me the alphabet and how you adapted to communicate with your brothers silently.
Well, one day a guy was up under my cell in the courtyard, the campgrounds there. He was coming back and hanging up his clothes on there's a line there to dry them on, and it was right under my window, and the window was covered with a rattan mat, so I couldn't see out it. But I could see straight down about 4 or 5 inches. I heard this guy say, hey, you guys in there know the code. We'd been there about 3 months.
Okay.
I said, no. I jumped up and looked down. I said, no. He said, my name is Chudy. Like Judy, but it's Chudy.
Chudy, okay.
I learned later it was Tschudy.
Okay.
And he said, it's a 5x5 matrix. A is 1, 1. B is 1, 2. And about that time, the guard came over and hit him and dragged him away.
Oh.
And
Short lesson.
And I was saying it back to my cellmate, and one of them, Jim Warner, was a brilliant guy. He said, "What's a missing letter?" And I said, "I don't know." He got dragged away before he told me. He said, a 5x5 matrix, that's 25 letters, there's 26 in the alphabet. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Well, I don't know." He didn't say, but it's probably Z, because Germans use Z a lot, but we don't, so it's probably Z. Right. So let's use that. So what we found out was we could hear guys out in those wash houses. They had bamboo brushes to scrub the mold and mildew and the moss off of them.
Okay.
And so guys would be out there sweeping code, and we'd hear it.
Unbelievable.
But if the letter in the word came after K, we couldn't hear it because K was a missing letter.
Okay.
It didn't make sense if there was a letter after K. So what we found out a month later was a guy who looked like me, my height, and had black hair like me. They put him in my cell by mistake, thinking they were returning me from an interrogation.
Okay.
Opened the door, slammed it, and ran off to lunch. And we said, "Hey, you know the code?" And he said, "Yeah." We said, "What's a missing letter?" He said, "It's K. Use C for K." Oh, okay. So now we had it. But this tap code, guys would tap for hours. They would tap poems. I mean,
unbelievable.
We'd tap to communicate, to stay united and tell everybody what's going on in the camp. And what to clarify the culture and all that came down from the senior ranking officers. But and you could, guys would even have a cough. They would cough the tap code. And then they came up with a cough code. They would cough 1, 2, and 3, and then for 4 they'd go, "Oh," that would be 4, and 5 would be spit.
Unreal.
So we
ingenuity.
Yeah, you always have to figure things out. And then another guy in a camp moved where he couldn't tap. There was a building, and there was another building about 20 yards away, and they had to be silent because there were guards out there. And he sat down one afternoon and came up with a hand code. A was the one finger sticking up, and B was like a B.
Okay.
C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z.
Wow.
And you could learn that
Did you
in
say
5
that's
minutes.
Q?
Yeah.
Wonder why that's Q.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
That was back in the 60s, you
Yeah,
know?
sure.
Yeah.
Just phenomenal.
Yeah.
So, Code of Honor, obviously you wanted to survive and return home with honor. Mm-hmm. But tell us, let's dive into the Code of Honor that you all embraced, and much like Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps and wrote the landmark book Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh yeah.
Very similar.
We'll talk about that later.
Okay.
I have a story on that too.
Okay, great. So, Code of Honor.
Well,
kept your spirits high.
The Code of Conduct, we had to memorize it. At the University of Georgia in ROTC, I was standing up, my back up against the wall. I was being oriented into the Arnold Air Society, and this big guy, senior, looks down at me and says, "Give me Article 5 of the Code of Conduct." Yeah. And I had to have it memorized so I could spit it out. Sure. So there were 5 or 6 articles in the code that developed after the Korean War because so many people, there was no guidance for how to behave in the POW camp in Korea. And a lot of them were 19, 18, 19, 20 years old, and a lot of them collaborated with the enemy, okay? So basically the Code of Conduct says you'll resist being captured, you'll be loyal to your country, you'll resist the enemy in terms of making no collaboration, you'll try to escape, you'll obey the commands of the person over. If you're a senior, you'll take command. If you're not, you'll obey the orders of the person over you. So real simple, but basic. Be loyal to your country, loyal to your teammates, and follow the orders. And if you're the leader, take charge. So the problem was they could torture you and make you do something. So our leaders, Colonel Robbie Reisner was the oldest and senior guy there, and he was so good at creating a culture. But Admiral Stockdale and Commander Stockdale and Denton, they're all 05. They were lieutenant colonel rank, commander, Navy, same as the Air Force lieutenant colonel. And so Reisner put it out, basically so simple but so powerful to go with the code of conduct. He said, resist the enemy up to the point of permanent physical or mental damage.
Ooh,
and
wow.
then no more. Go ahead and give in, give as little as possible, bounce back because they're going to come after you again. Stay united through communications. Pray every day. Go home proud, return with honor. Now, how simple is that?
That's simple.
But it was so powerful because he told us that they can make you do something. Just don't give them what they want.
Right.
And so we would lie, cheat, and steal.
Yeah.
And they did not understand our culture very well, so we could deceive them. You know, one guy was tortured to tell about somebody in their squadron that was against the war. And he said, there's nobody in my squadrons against the war. We're all very positive and loyal. And they finally tortured him so much that he had to give them an answer. And so he said it was Clark Kent and some guy on TV, Ben, somebody, I forgot now who it was, but he gave two very well-known, famous people. Clark Kent was Superman back then, you know, and Ben Casey.
Okay.
Ben Casey and Clark Kent.
Okay.
Okay. So he answered that question, but they didn't know that they were getting their chain pulled, you know.
Oh, gosh. Brilliant.
So I was tortured to fill out a 3-page biography. I think they were collecting information for the Russians, but we all were. I didn't know that at the time, but I finally filled it out. And when I finished filling it out, they put me back in the leg irons and handcuffs. I was laying this filthy floor, and I cried like a baby. I was so ashamed. I was the lowest human being that ever worn a uniform because I couldn't beat them.
You. Yeah.
Okay? I didn't know you couldn't beat them.
Oh.
I thought everybody else is beating me, doing better than I am. Well, I get back to my cell, and one of my cellmates has already gone through it, and he's back before me. And Ken Fisher came back after me. Now, Ken Fisher was a New York State wrestling champion and wrestled 4 years in college.
Pretty tough dude.
He's a pretty tough dude. He lasted longer than I did. But we learned secretly the next week that everybody in the camp had been through that. And you have to reach a point where you just can't go any longer. And it's different for different people.
Sure,
Some
of course
are
it is.
just tougher than others. But if you do your best, then you can think it through and beat them. And the only thing I put on those 3-page biography was my dad's first and last name, hoping I get to write a letter out.
Yeah.
Everything else was a lie.
Wow.
So,
Wow. So let's talk about the unfortunate but real subject of torture.
yeah.
And torture's been a tactic throughout the course of humanity. What kind of torture did you and your fellow POWs experience?
Well, the worst torture probably was the rope torture, the pretzel, where they tied your wrists behind you, and then your legs are tied or in leg irons, usually leg irons if they have them there. And they tied your wrists behind you and threw you on the floor and tied the rope around one of your arms right above the elbow. And then they would stand on the other elbow and keep cinching it, loop it around and cinch it up until your elbows touched.
Oh, my God.
Now, that tears away up in here.
Sure, your pectoralis major.
And then...
I can't even imagine that.
Yeah. And then the guy behind you, and there's a picture of that in my book there, the guy behind you, the torturer behind you, would grab your arms and lift them up over your head, and the one in front of you would put his foot on your head and push you down, and this guy's pushing up. So we're just ripping it out more. And sometimes they would tie your ankles to your wrists in that position and leave you there for hours.
Oh.
So 40% of the guys went through that. I didn't get to go through that. Good. But the other thing they would do with that, which Ken Fisher did, was they would tie your elbows behind you like that and then run a rope through them and throw it over a beam and pull you up off the floor so you're hanging by your arms tied behind your back. And he hung for 37 minutes, that tough New York State wrestling champion, and finally gave in because it was killing him.
I would imagine some of them had some permanent damage.
Oh, yeah.
Inevitably?
His arms were damaged for a couple of years, but a lot of them have the rope burns still on their arms.
Wow.
Because it cut off the circulation and it just burned
like
them.
And
they have stains on scars on their arms. Yeah.
Wow. Unbelievable.
But those guys, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8 years, came home. 95% of us were tortured at one time or another.
Yeah.
The other, what we call the humane torture, which is what I went through, they put me, I was in leg irons, and they handcuffed my hands and then made me put them on the wall and put me on my knees on the concrete slab floor, with my arms over my head like this. Well, after a few hours, if you're on your knees on concrete slab floor with your hands up like that, you just start shaking and fall
of course.
down. I'd fall down, and they'd come in and start kicking me and beating me up, and I'd get back up, and then I'd fall down, and then I'd get back up, and I'd fall down. We call that humane torture.
Okay. Oh.
Okay. So eventually,
sounds humane to me.
I gave in, and okay, I'll do it. I'll fill out that form. And then the next time, it was for me to read on the camp radio. They always wanted one of us, and they would torture guys to read on the camp radio during the day and record it, or live. Actually, we were not recording that; it was live. And so we would change our tone and mispronounce words and give guys a lot. The funniest one was the guy who, the first guy to read Ho Chi Minh's name, who was their founder and president.
Sure.
Ho Chi Minh. And President Horseshit Minh says,
oh my God.
And guys, you could hear guys giggling up and down the halls.
Sure.
It really, we were always looking for ways. After we'd been there for 2 or 3 months, we started laughing.
Okay.
And humor became a very important part of life.
Absolutely.
So you're always looking for ways to be funny.
Yes. Oh, that's great. That is great.
Yeah.
So I want to read one paragraph from your awesome book, Leading with Honor. Speaking of Reisner.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this is mental torture.
Mm-hmm.
This is mental adversity. So Reisner's only relief was to keep moving and praying. He would walk around his cell, often covering as many as 20 miles a day, and do push-ups and sit-ups until he was exhausted enough to fall asleep. If he awakened during the night, he had to resume exercising until he was again exhausted enough to sleep. It was a maddening existence. At times he wanted to scream, but since that would bring more torture, he would hide under his mosquito net, stuff something in his mouth, wrap his blanket around his head, and just holler until the anxiety eased. Often he had to talk to himself into making it through one more minute and then one more minute. As he put it, I literally lived 1 minute at a time. I mean, that could turn any solitary confinement experience into an eternity.
Yes, it could. But mentally and physically healthy. If you're a fighter, you got to be in a fighter pilot crew. Whether you're a pilot like most of us were, or a navigator, or electronic weapons officer. Some of them were. You've got to be that, but also you got to be competitive. And we just were, I guess, as the era we grew up in too, we're just bound and determined. We have a commitment.
Sure.
We have a commitment. We're going to keep our commitment to the best
phenomenal.
we can. By the way, I was the first person to communicate with Reisner after he came out of 10 months in total darkness and isolation.
Months.
That what you were just reading about?
Yes.
He told me he'd been in total darkness for 10 months. And they put him in a cell. There was 90 degrees to my cell and about 20 yards away. And I got up up high and pushed that covering over my window back until I could see into his cell.
Yes.
And he and I started communicating. He looked up one day and he saw me, and he smiled and started shaking his head, and he held up his hand and started spelling words. Took his index finger on his right hand, and his left hand was his writing pad, and he would just spell out letters and spelled out words that way. And we had about 30 minutes when the guards were not around during their siesta. Now the guards were there, but they were kind of dragging around, and we could kind of see them and hear them coming and drop off and not get caught. But he was just an amazing guy. He was such an optimist. He bounced back, and he set a great example for all of us.
Absolute hero. Just incredible. I heard the words come out of your mouth that he spent 10 months in solitary, but you can't even fathom that. Unless you've experienced that, there's no way you can even perceive that or begin to imagine that that mental adversity.
Right. Well, Denton, Stockdale, and Reisner spent all over 4 years in solitary, okay? But this was 10 months in total darkness. Oh. And that's what was driving him crazy, because he couldn't see the rats running around. We had big rats running around in there in the cells at night, and especially if it was dark, but even when it wasn't dark. They were always looking for something, and bugs of all kinds and everything, and he just held in there. Wow. And by the way, he died at almost 89. He was 3 months short of 89.
Wow. God
Denton
bless him.
Denton was 7.5 year POW also, and in solitary more than 4 years, and he lived to be 3 months short of 90.
Wow. Just amazing.
And Stockdale died early. He got dementia and Alzheimer's and died early at 82.
Wow. Well, at least he made it to his 80s.
Yeah. Incredible guys.
Totally incredible. Yeah. So I think you went home in 1973?
Yes.
Is that accurate? Mm-hmm. What was that like, finally leaving and going home and reacclimating to a normal life? Did any of you had PTSD? What was the reality of going home?
Well, one of the great things was what the wives were doing back home, and they got it started in the families. I was single, but my family got involved also, was the National League of POW/MI Families. It started out as League of Wives, and then it was National League of POW/MI Families. And they put pressure on our government to put pressure on the communists in North Vietnam to change their policy and abide by the Geneva Conventions, which they had signed, which said they would treat captured combatants by lenient and humane treatment, which they weren't, of course. And so they put pressure on them. Well, when Ho Chi Minh died in September of 1969, I'd been there 2 years. Some guys had been there 4 years, okay? The new leadership were sensitive to the bad PR they were getting around the world now, because these wives were out there. Ross Perot paid for many of them to go to Paris and confront the communist diplomats who were there for the Paris peace talks about Vietnam, and confront them with big bags of letters, and many of them traveled to 17 countries. A couple of wives did. And meeting with people to try to get these kind of intermediate countries, like Norway and Sweden, to put pressure on the communists about our treatment to change and treat us well. Well, when Ho Chi Minh died, the new leadership told their camp commanders to stop the torture. And it almost did. I mean, there were a few guys tortured here and there, but day-to-day torture went away, and it became live and let live, which totally allowed us to become more healthy again. We're locked up with people who've been through a lot worse than we have, more torture, 2 years longer. And here's a guy over here that had his back broken and his legs broken, and now he's recovered and he's out there walking and doing push-ups.
Incredible.
That kind of situation, we knew that we had to get healthy, because if we'd have come home in 1969, they were torturing people right and left in the summer of '69 because they'd had an escape at the zoo camp. So we wanted to get healthy, mentally, psychologically healthy, and we let go of our anger. We let go of our bitterness. We let go of our shame that we weren't tough as we wanted to. We let go of shame, anger, bitterness, all that stuff.
I need some of that. I need to do that.
Well, we all have to coach ourselves to do that.
Yeah.
We all have areas where we're insecure. And so pride,
Sure.
you know.
Sure.
We got taken, that kind of went away pretty early after we got to
Oh,
Georgia.
yeah. I get it. I get it.
But living together like that, we had such a good relationship. I lived in a cell with almost 2 years with 52 guys, 1,800 square foot room with 52 guys. Imagine that. At
Those become
1,800
foxhole
square feet,
buddies.
52 guys. And only twice did one guy yell at another, and they apologized before we went to bed.
Wow. Yeah, that's phenomenal.
We didn't have beds. We slept on
Sure.
concrete slabs.
Yeah, bed's a relative term.
Right.
Yeah. It was horizontal.
But that was our bed, you know. That was our life, you know. And it became our way of life. And so we, during that time, we got organized in that big cell, which came after the Sante raid on the Sante camp. We'd already moved away from there, but our government didn't know that for sure. So the Green Berets raided that very successfully. But within 48 hours, they didn't get anybody. But we'd moved out. But within 48 hours, they put us all back in the Hanoi Hilton in another part of that complex where Vietnamese prisoners had been, because it was their city jail also. And that's when we went in those big cells of 1,800, 2,000 square feet. And this is where we had classes. We had Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday classes, 3 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. And I started studying French. I'd had French in college. I was the worst French student that ever went to Georgia. But now I got into it, and it turned out I had a knack for a pretty good ability to learn languages because I was just speaking them. So I got fluent in French, fluent in Spanish, and had 2,000 word vocabulary in German.
Good Lord.
A guy from the Naval Academy who was a math major taught me differential calculus. And writing we didn't have any books.
There's some advantage in adversity
No
right
book,
there.
no
right,
book.
Right.
And we wrote things on a concrete slab floor with a piece of red broken brick tile.
Unreal.
And we'd work problems. But the
human spirit.
The words, we would just memorize 3 or 4 Spanish words and French words and German words every day. And we'd walk around that cell, do circles walking around it. We'd walk 10 or 15 miles a day, and we'd be talking to ourselves, going over them. We'd talk, okay, me and you walk together, and we'll go over French and speak French for a while. And then, okay, let's go speak Spanish.
Wow.
It's amazing what we did because we didn't have anything else to do, and you got to do something.
You got to do something. Keep your mind right.
Yep.
Keep from going crazy.
Memorize poems.
We
memorized long poems. Some guy had memorized a poem. We had some brilliant guys there.
I'm sure you had a lot of brilliant guys.
Yeah.
Wow. Just incredible. Just incredible. Well, as we wrap up here, Colonel, I'd love to give you an opportunity to, plug yourself, do a little commercial in your leadership coaching business and practice. What types of organizations do you serve? Do you coach? What content do you focus? Obviously leadership, but what do you come in and do for an organization, whether it's small business or Fortune 500? What's your real sweet spot?
Yeah, and I work with Fortune 200, 500 companies at the highest level, CEOs. I have a great story in the book there about a CEO I coached who was a West Point graduate, Army Ranger, and a great guy, strong Christian, but he never gave anybody positive feedback.
Oh, gosh.
And I taught him how to do that.
It changed his life and others.
It totally changed his life. And now he's known as one of the best CEOs in Atlanta.
Oh, that's awesome. Atlanta.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah, he is. But I do a lot of I've been doing workshops for 27 years with leadership teams or a leadership class. Big companies have leadership classes, but they also have, they'll take their senior group and go through a course, half day or 1 day, something with me, and then the next group down will go through that. And we have an online course based around my 2016 book, which is one of the best ways and the cheapest ways to get leadership training for your team.
Okay.
The Engage with Honor online course. It takes you through each chapter, but there's online information for each individual to process through with videos of me speaking.
Oh, wonderful.
A couple of other friends speaking, and even Ralph Del Vega, who was CEO of the Bell South Mobility,
Bell South,
and also AT&T is in there, and several folks. But anyway, that's online, and the group goes through, and then they debrief it, and they sit around and talk about it for an hour, what that lesson in that chapter is, and that's what's been so good. People say, we've never sat down and talked about this before, and now we're collaborating better. But anyway, so that's good. And then I'm doing a lot of speaking. I speak at conventions. I speak at conferences, Southern Farm Bureau conference, Georgia Farm Bureau conference, or I just spoke to the general GAU, I forgot what it is, but I forgot. But anyway, several big conventions and that sort of thing. And I speak at Air Force bases, and I speak and train kind of a workshop, 2-hour workshop with NAVAIR, Naval Air Systems Command. I've been doing that for a few years. So I go to the Pentagon occasionally. And
that's got to be cool.
Something. Yeah. So it just whoever wants to hear some good leadership stories, but I have 27 years working in the corporate world with leaders, and I ran 2 leadership schools in the Air Force.
Wow!
So
you can bring it.
And I've written 3 leadership books. So,
Do you sleep?
Yes, I sleep well.
That's good.
I think the most important thing is you got to believe in yourself. You got to know yourself, and nobody's perfect. And so you got to know what your strengths are, your natural talents, and where you're not naturally talented, you have to learn to adapt. You have to learn to adapt. Let's say the guy I was talking about, he was really good at results and getting the mission done, but he wasn't naturally talented to encourage people and let them know you care about them and listen to them.
Yes.
And let them. And
he was probably a high D on the disc chart.
Yes, and he was. And so he learned to adapt. He didn't reinvent himself. You can't change who you are. But when you learn to adapt to just a little bit, it goes a long way.
Sure.
And if you're a hugger and a relationship person, you have to learn to deal with things when they're getting off course. You call them in and say, wait a minute. Tell me what's wrong here. This is not This is not working. You're supposed to have this done by Friday.
Right.
I don't think you're going to have it done by Friday. What's wrong?
Yeah.
You got to hold people accountable.
Yes.
So you got to do both. You got to get results. You got to take care of your people, and you got to be kind, and you got to be tough.
Sure.
And that balance is really, it's character first, and then courage, because you cannot guard your character. You cannot adapt without courage, because your doubts and fears will always take you out.
Yes.
So we have a coaching card. We talk about courage and how to adapt, and we help people learn to adapt to their strength. And then you have to understand the talents of your people, because if you put me in a room where I'm supposed to do accounting all day by myself, I'd be a failure.
Sure, me too.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I tell people, if the person's talents are 3 or 4, they might get to 6 or 7. But if their talents are 5 or 6, natural talents for that area, they can go to a 9 or 10.
Sure.
And which one's going to perform better?
9 or 10.
You got to accept the fact that not everybody's exactly the same. Now, we all have to adapt in some areas, but I have to keep some records and that sort of thing, but I don't want to keep records all day long.
No.
Not me.
No, not our personality style.
Right.
Well, this has been fantastic, Colonel. Thank you so much. How can people reach you? If somebody wants to hire you, what's the best way to reach you?
Just go to leadingwithhonor.com.
Okay.
And you can connect us with there, leadingwithhonor.com. And our new book, I wanted to mention, Captured by Love.
Yes.
Inspiring True Romance Stories from Vietnam POWs. Now, guys don't normally read romance books, but
this is the kind of romance book a guy can read.
That's right. It's got war stories in it.
Yes.
And also between every chapter, every love story, there's a 1-page or 2-page historical highlight that tells you what was happening in the POW camps, or half of them tell you what was going on back home with the wives and families back home in our country. And we highlight the great work by the women and how they changed the POW treatment. They changed the communist policy, and that's how we came home with lower PTSD than the combat veterans who fought in the South. We have been very, very successful in our marriages, since we came home. I was single. I met Mary. I've been married almost 49 years.
Wow.
But even the guys who came home and their wives had divorced them, they met somebody within 6 or 8 months, and they've been married 48, 49 years.
Incredible.
So we really learned how to be resilient and to keep our commitment.
Well, just fantastic, and you just speak volumes about finding advantage in the adversity, which is what this show is all about. So thank you, Colonel, for being here. I really, really appreciate it, and always great to see you. Haven't aged a day in eons.
Oh, I have.
You look fantastic.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, folks, how about another riveting conversation? You know, what's resonating with me right now is I don't care if you have a bad day, week, month. I don't care if you have a bad year. You haven't spent 5 years as a POW at the Hanoi Hilton. Everything is relative. So hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please consider liking and sharing and subscribing to the channel. That's how we grow the channel. And growth is a good thing. You're the growing or dying. But hey, we're coming to you here from North Atlanta Studios, Mesmerize Media. I hope you have a phenomenal week. Out.